The night was thick with the hum of engines and the harsh glare of floodlights slicing through the darkness like blades. A row of workers in yellow helmets moved mechanically, their faces hidden in shadow as machines tore into the earth. Dust floated in the humid air, clinging to sweat-drenched skin. To anyone passing by, it was just another night of roadwork, routine, predictable, forgettable. But for those who stood under the humming lamps that night, nothing would ever feel routine again. Wei stood slightly apart from the others, clipboard in hand, his eyes fixed on the excavator that clawed into the ground with an unsteady rhythm. He had been an engineer long enough to know when a machine wasn't right. At first, he thought the soil was simply too compact, hardened by years of asphalt. But then the bucket screeched and locked up as though it had struck something it was never meant to touch. The operator cursed, tried again, and the entire cab shuddered as sparks spat out from metal grinding against stone. "Kill it," Wei called, his voice steady but edged. The machine groaned to a stop, its sudden silence making the night feel unnaturally still. The workers gathered, muttering, peering into the open trench. Flashlights bobbed. One man spat into the dirt, another laughed nervously, pretending it was nothing more than a rock. But Wei saw their eyes. He felt their unease mirror his own. A faint glow shimmered below. It was so subtle, at first he thought it was a trick of the lights, maybe a reflection from the flood lamps. But when the others leaned closer, their voices dropped into whispers. The light wasn't artificial. It wasn't a reflection. It was radiating from the ground itself. "Back up," Wei ordered, though his own legs betrayed him, dragging him closer instead. The trench revealed something buried deep, a curved shape, smooth and pale, glimmering like pearl beneath layers of soil. "Stone," one worker murmured. "No stone glows like that." Another shot back. The men began to mutter about omens, curses, miracles. Wei felt his chest tighten, not from belief, but from recognition of something extraordinary and terrifying. Slowly, carefully, the crew began brushing away dirt with their hands. Piece by piece, the shape revealed itself. A face, serene and sorrowful, emerged from the soil, eyes half closed in eternal meditation. It was unmistakable, the statue of Guanyin. Gasps rippled through the group. Some stepped back instinctively, as if standing too close might draw down lightning. One worker dropped to his knees, pressing his palms together, whispering prayers. Another laughed too loudly, a nervous, cracked sound that didn't belong to mirth. Wei stared, his breath caught in his throat. He had seen statues before, in temples his late sister used to drag him to, back when she was alive. She had loved Guanyin, the goddess of mercy, believing her to be a protector of the suffering. Wei had dismissed it as childish superstition. Now, under the mechanical glare of wax lamps, he saw the goddess's face shining through the earth as if it had been waiting centuries to be found. A cold shiver crawled down his spine. Someone shouted, "Don't touch it." But another man, trembling with curiosity, reached out. His fingertips grazed the stone. The glow pulsed brighter, sending a hush through the group. The man jerked back with a yelp, as though shocked by invisible current. His palm bore no burn, no injury, but his face was pale. Wei's voice cut through. "Everyone away from the trench. Now!" Reluctantly, they obeyed, scattering back under the lamps, murmuring to each other in hushed, frantic voices. Wei stayed where he was, staring at the half-buried form. It wasn't just the glow. There was something else, an energy pressing against his chest, making the air heavy, thick. His rational mind clawed for explanations. Phosphorescent minerals? Bioluminescent fungi? He knew geology enough to know neither explanation fit. The glow wasn't natural. As the night stretched on, the news spread among the crew, carried like fire along dry brush. Phones flicked on. Flashes lit the trench, shaky videos were recorded. Within an hour, someone had already uploaded the footage online. By midnight, strangers began to gather near the cordon, curious faces lit by phone screens, whispering, filming. Wei tried to control the chaos, tried to keep focus on safety and protocol, but he couldn't shake what he'd seen. That serene face, gazing upward from the soil, looked almost alive, and when he closed his eyes for a moment, just to steady his nerves, he swore he saw a flicker of movement, the slightest shift of an eyelid, the faintest turn of a mouth. He opened his eyes in panic, but the statue was still frozen. By dawn, the crowd had grown into dozens, then hundreds. Some came with incense, kneeling on the dusty roadside, whispering prayers through trembling lips. Others jeered, calling it a hoax, demanding answers from the city officials who had arrived with clipboards and stern faces. Reporters pushed microphones at the workers, cameras flashing. The discovery was no longer theirs. It belonged to everyone, and everyone wanted a piece of it. Wei stood apart, silent, feeling the world spin too fast around him. He remembered his sister's soft voice years ago, telling him that mercy could be found even in the darkest of places. He had scoffed then, turned away, and later carried the weight of her absence when an accident stole her life. He had buried his grief deep, locking it away beneath years of silence. But standing here, staring at the goddess rising from the ground, he felt something crack inside. The crowd pressed closer to the trench, their whispers swelling into a chorus of awe and fear. Wei's supervisor barked orders, pushing them back, but the air was already charged with hysteria. One man in the crowd shouted, "It's a miracle." Another countered, "It's a trick." The clash of belief and doubt grew louder, sharper, like a storm building. Then, without warning, the lights flickered. The flood lamps that had burned steadily all night dimmed, then flared, then died altogether. Darkness swept the sight. Gasps rose from the crowd, followed by silence so thick it felt alive. And in that silence, the statue glowed brighter than ever. Its light poured through the trench, washing over the faces of those who stared down into it. Some cried, some fell to their knees, some turned away in fear. Wei couldn't move. His heart hammered as he watched the stone radiate a soft, pulsing brilliance, as if alive, as if breathing. In the sudden hush, a worker near him whispered, "It's watching us." Wei swallowed hard, unable to shake the feeling that he was right. When the floodlights flickered back to life, the glow dimmed, returning to its faint shimmer. But the memory of that moment clung to everyone who had witnessed it. The crowd erupted in shouts, reporters screamed into cameras, police rushed to push people back. Wei remained frozen. He knew life had just split into before and after. And as he stood there, clipboard forgotten in his hand, he realized something terrifying. The statue wasn't just unearthed. It was waking up. The morning sun bled across the horizon, painting the sky in gold and crimson, but no one at the site cared for its beauty. The trench had become a magnet for bodies, voices, and emotions that swirled together in restless energy. Barricades were erected overnight, yet the crowd only thickened. Officials tried to enforce order, shouting through megaphones, but people pressed forward anyway, pulled by something none of them could explain. Wei hadn't slept. His clothes still smelled of dust and engine oil, his eyes bloodshot, his mind racing. He stood at the edge of the trench as the city awoke around him, watching incense smoke curl upward from makeshift shrines that strangers had left by the roadside. The Guanyin statue, half submerged in soil, still emitted its faint glow, though in the daylight it was softer, almost gentle. And yet, despite the calm expression on the goddess's face, Wei felt anything but peace. His phone buzzed non-stop, reporters demanding statements, officials requesting silence, colleagues urging him to deny the nonsense of miracles. But the voices of the people around him were louder. Mothers whispered prayers for sick children. Old men wiped tears from their weathered cheeks. A young woman held a photograph of her missing brother, pressing it against her chest as she knelt, begging for answers from stone lips. It was chaos and reverence twisted together, a storm of hope and fear. Wei pressed his hand against his chest as if to cage the unease building inside. He could still hear his sister's voice, echoing from years long gone. "Mercy is always near, Wei. You just have to look." He had mocked her then, telling her stone idols couldn't change lives. Yet now, watching the desperate faces of strangers kneeling in the dirt, he wondered if he had been the fool. The mayor's car arrived mid-morning, black and gleaming. Suited men stepped out with grim expressions, flanked by police. They ordered the workers to halt further digging, claiming safety concerns. But their words barely rippled against the sea of whispers. "Why hide it?" a man shouted from the crowd. "You're afraid of the truth," cried another. The officials bristled, tightening their control. Reporters jostled for space, cameras rolling. Tension thickened, brittle as glass. Wei turned away from it all, his eyes drawn back to the statue's serene face. It seemed to gaze upward, unbothered by human chaos, as if it knew something no one else did. That was when he noticed it again. The faint shimmer across the stone was not steady, it pulsed, rhythmically, like a heartbeat. His breath caught. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, but the glow persisted. No one else seemed to notice. His skin prickled as if unseen eyes were pressing against him. He staggered back a step, pulse racing. "Mr. Wei." A voice pulled him back. It was Lin, one of the younger crew members, her helmet tucked under her arm. She looked pale, shaken. "You saw it, didn't you?" Wei's jaw tightened. "Saw what?" "The light." Her voice cracked. "It moves, like it's alive." He wanted to deny it, to cling to logic, but the look in her eyes was too familiar. Fear, wonder, the same emotions clawing through him. He swallowed hard. "Don't say that out loud," he warned. "Why not? Everyone here is already thinking it." Her words lingered. Wei turned his face away, but he couldn't escape the truth pressing into him. By noon, the crowd grew more restless. Some prayed louder, chanting until their voices rose like a tide. Others screamed accusations of trickery, demanding the workers admit to burying the statue there as some kind of stunt. A scuffle broke out near the barricades, fists flying, cries of anger and devotion clashing together. Wei tried to focus on his clipboard, his duties, but his hands shook. The statue's face burned in his mind, searing through layers of logic. He remembered the night his sister died, how powerless he had been, how desperately he had prayed even though he claimed not to believe. He had begged for mercy then, but none had come. Or perhaps, he thought now, mercy had been waiting all along, buried under earth, biding its time. The thought chilled him. That evening, when the sun dipped and shadows stretched long across the ground, the crowd hushed on its own. Wei followed their gaze. The statue glowed brighter. This time, it wasn't subtle. The brilliance spread outward, wrapping the trench in warm, silvery light. It spilled across the crowd like a tide, illuminating faces streaked with tears, widening eyes, trembling hands. Silence held them captive. And then, faint, delicate, unmistakable, a sound. A whisper. Wei's breath hitched. It wasn't in the air. It was inside his head, soft as a feather brushing against thought. He stiffened, searching the faces around him, but they all looked the same, transfixed, haunted, as if they too had heard something they couldn't name. The whispers grew louder, though not in words he could understand. They weren't words at all, more like fragments of emotion, shards of longing, sorrow, hope. It was as if the statue wasn't speaking, but feeling, and somehow pouring that feeling into them. A woman near him dropped to her knees, sobbing. "She forgives us," she cried. Another man clutched his chest, whispering, "She knows my pain." Wei staggered back, his vision blurring. He felt it too, a swell of grief rising inside him, raw and suffocating. Memories rushed forward. His sister's laughter, her lifeless body in a hospital bed, his own silence as he walked away from her prayers. His throat burned as if the whispers had torn open wounds he had buried years ago. But beneath the grief, another current stirred, something almost tender, a warmth that pressed against his broken edges, not to erase them, but to hold them. Mercy. He shook his head violently. No, this couldn't be real. It was mass hysteria, collective delusion. And yet, the tears streaking down his face betrayed him. The glow dimmed. The whispers faded. The night swallowed the silence again. The crowd erupted, voices colliding in frenzy. Some screamed it was a miracle. Others shouted it was witchcraft. Police struggled to contain the surge of bodies, but belief, whether for or against, had already taken root. Wei stood frozen, hollow and trembling. His chest felt both shattered and full. He turned to Lin, who stood near him, her face streaked with tears. "Did you?" She nodded before he could finish. "I heard her." Wei pressed his hand to his mouth. He wanted to deny it, bury it, but the truth clawed at him. Whatever was happening here, it was real. That night, Wei lay awake in his small apartment, staring at the ceiling. The city outside buzzed with rumors, television anchors debating, social media exploding, families whispering. He could not silence the whispers in his own head, replaying over and over. Mercy, regret, forgiveness. He closed his eyes, and for a moment he thought he saw his sister standing at the foot of his bed, her smile soft, her eyes kind. Wei jerked upright, heart pounding, but the room was empty. Still, her voice lingered. Mercy is always near, Wei. And for the first time in years, he believed she might have been right. The days that followed blurred into one another, but the memory of the glow refused to leave. It clung to Wei like a shadow, wrapping itself around every waking thought. He had always believed in work, in things he could measure, weight of soil, depth of trenches, cost of fuel. Yet now, none of those numbers mattered. All that filled his mind was the echo of whispers, the faint brush of mercy against wounds he thought he'd buried. The city would not stay silent either. News outlets broadcast images of the glowing Guanyin day and night. Some called it the miracle of the century. Others dismissed it as trickery, perhaps phosphorescent minerals or hidden technology. Scientists were invited on talk shows, each offering theories, none conclusive. But the voices of believers grew louder than reason. Pilgrims flooded the city, carrying incense, flowers, desperate pleas. Hotels filled, streets choked with buses and crowds. Every night, candles flickered like stars around the barricades. Wei avoided the sight as much as he could, but duty demanded his presence. Every time he stood by the trench, he felt like he was walking into a confessional booth where the walls could hear his sins. He no longer needed the glow to feel exposed. Even the mere presence of the statue carved open his heart. One evening, when the crowd had thinned and the barricades were nearly deserted, he found himself standing alone with Lin. She was smoking, her hand trembling slightly as she exhaled. "They'll never let us finish the road," she muttered. "They'll never even let us touch the soil again," Wei said. Her eyes flicked toward the statue, then back at him. "Does it scare you?" He didn't answer at once. He thought of the whispers, of his sister, of the fleeting vision at the foot of his bed. "Yes," he admitted finally. Lin took another drag, her expression unreadable. "It comforts me," she said softly. "For the first time in years, I don't feel so alone." The words stung. Wei wished he could share her comfort, but all he felt was the crushing weight of things undone. That night, the dreams began. At first, they were fleeting, shadows of his sister's face, her laughter carried down empty halls. But they grew darker. He dreamed of her lying beneath the earth where the statue now stood, her lips moving as if praying, her eyes staring at him with a mixture of sorrow and forgiveness. He dreamed of standing in the trench as the soil closed in around him, whispers filling his ears until they drowned out his own thoughts. He woke drenched in sweat, gasping. His chest felt heavy, as if unseen hands were pressing down, punishing him for years of disbelief, for walking away when she had begged him to sit beside her and pray. By the third night, he stopped sleeping altogether. The city itself began to fracture. Protests erupted, some demanding the statue be enshrined, others claiming it was a dangerous superstition. Religious leaders clashed with government officials, while journalists spun the story into whatever shape would draw the most eyes. The discovery no longer belonged to the workers who unearthed it. It belonged to everyone and no one. Wei felt the tension in the streets like a storm waiting to break. Shops near the site closed early, fearing riots. Police presence doubled, yet people still gathered in droves. And all the while, Wei carried his private war inside him, a war between the rational man he had always been and the trembling soul who could no longer deny the pull of something divine or something far darker. Late one evening, he sat alone in his apartment, nursing a glass of baijiu. The TV murmured in the background with images of the site, voices arguing endlessly. He muted it, unable to bear the noise. Instead, he closed his eyes. The whispers came instantly. "Why did you leave her? You prayed when it was too late. Mercy was near. You turned away." Wei clutched his head, whispering aloud to drown them. "Stop, please." But they only deepened, curling into his marrow. That was when the knock came at his door. He stumbled to open it, finding Lin standing there, her expression pale but urgent. "You're hearing it too, aren't you?" she whispered. Wei froze. "How do you know?" Her hands trembled. Because it doesn't stop. Even when I'm miles away. She follows me. Her voice broke, and she pressed a hand to her mouth. For a long moment, they just stared at each other, bound by something neither could escape. Then, softly, Lin said, I don't think it's just about the statue. I think it's about us. About what we've done. What we hide. The words cut deep. Wei turned away, unable to meet her eyes. What are you saying? I'm saying it's not just a miracle. It's a mirror. Silence thickened. Wei's throat tightened as the truth sank in. Every whisper, every vision, wasn't about the world outside. It was about him. His grief. His guilt. His refusal to believe in anything greater than his own hands. The following day, the inevitable happened. A fight broke out near the barricades. Someone set fire to an abandoned cart. Chaos spread like flames on dry grass. Police clashed with protesters, batons swinging, tear gas spilling through the air. People screamed, some chanting prayers louder to be heard over the violence. And in the heart of it all, the statue stood untouched, its faint glow mocking the darkness of human rage. Wei found himself trapped near the trench, choking on smoke, pushing through bodies that clawed and stumbled. He could hear Lin shouting his name somewhere in the chaos. But louder still were the whispers inside his skull, thundering now, impossible to ignore. What will you choose? Silence or mercy? He stumbled, dropped to his knees, the ground trembling under the weight of boots and screams. Tears blurred his vision. He pressed his hands to his face, the whispers searing through him like fire. And then, clearer than ever, his sister's voice. Wei, look. He raised his head. Through the smoke and fire, he saw the statue's eyes. For the first time, they were open. The breath caught in his throat. The world seemed to stop. For a heartbeat, he thought he saw not stone, but living eyes, gentle, unyielding, piercing straight through him. The riot around him faded into nothing. All he could hear was his own heartbeat, pounding like a drum of judgment. He collapsed forward, sobbing, not from fear but from the unbearable weight of what he had carried all these years. The shadow of regret had finally swallowed him whole. The world was burning. Screams split the air, smoke turned the night sky into a suffocating shroud, and fire licked the edges of the barricades like a ravenous beast. Wei stumbled through the chaos, his knees scraping the dirt, his lungs clawing for air. Somewhere in the storm of violence and fear, he still heard it. The whisper that was not a whisper, the voice that had haunted his nights and broken into his days. Wei, do not turn away again. He lifted his head, eyes stinging. The glowing statue stood at the heart of the chaos, impossibly calm. Its radiance seemed to pulse brighter with each passing moment, as though drawing strength from the fire around it. The stone eyes that he had sworn were closed now stared into him, alive, unblinking. Hands grabbed him suddenly. He spun, ready to fight, but it was Lin, her face streaked with ash, her eyes wide with terror. We have to get out, now, she shouted above the roar of the crowd. But Wei didn't move. His gaze remained locked on the figure in the trench, a silent guardian in the flames. He shook his head slowly. If I leave now, I'll never escape it. Lin's grip tightened. What are you talking about? This place is falling apart. He turned to her then, his face wet with tears he hadn't realized were falling. It's not just the statue, Lin. It's me. I've been running from the truth my whole life. From my sister. From my faith. From myself. His voice cracked, but he forced the words out. If I leave again, I'll never forgive myself. For a moment, Lin just stared at him, breathing hard, ash settling in her hair like snowfall. Then, slowly, her hand loosened. Her eyes shimmered, not with fear this time, but with something else. Understanding. Together, they turned back to the statue. The crowd surged, half in worship, half in rage. Some tried to protect the trench, others tried to destroy it. Rocks were thrown, fists raised, chants colliding in a storm of human desperation. A bottle shattered nearby, flames leaping higher. The earth itself seemed to tremble beneath the weight of belief and fury. And through it all, Wei heard his sister's voice. Clear, steady, this is your fire. Wei, walk through it. He stepped forward. Each stride felt heavier than the last, as if the air itself pressed against him. Heat seared his skin, smoke clawed at his lungs, but he kept moving, eyes never leaving the glow. Lin followed, coughing, shielding her face with her sleeve. They reached the edge of the trench. The statue glowed so brightly now it bathed their faces in gold. Wei felt his knees weaken, not from fear but from the unbearable pull of something greater than himself. He dropped to the ground. The whispers crescendoed, thousands of voices, a chorus of grief and mercy, regret and forgiveness. And at the center, his sister's voice rose above them all. "You left me once. Don't leave yourself now." Wei pressed his forehead to the earth, tears falling freely. His voice was hoarse, but the words came like a flood breaking through a dam. "I'm sorry. I was afraid. I thought belief was weakness, that silence was strength. But I was wrong. I was wrong, Mai. Please, if you can hear me, please forgive me." Silence followed. A silence so deep it swallowed the fire, the screams, the riot. For one breathless moment, there was nothing but stillness. And then, light. It poured from the statue like a river, golden and blinding. The crowd froze, their fury dissolving into awe. Even the flames seemed to bend away, as though retreating from its power. Wei lifted his head, eyes wide, bathed in radiance that felt like warmth and absolution all at once. He saw her, not just in memory, not just in dreams. His sister stood before him, smiling through tears, her form woven from light. Her lips moved, and though no sound carried, Wei knew what she said. "You are forgiven." The weight that had crushed his chest for years shattered like glass. He gasped, sobbed, laughed all at once. For the first time in his life, he felt whole. The vision faded, the light dimming back to a soft glow. The statue stood silent once more, its eyes returned to stone. The riot was gone. People fell to their knees, some weeping, some clutching one another in stunned reverence. Lin knelt beside him, her face streaked with tears. "Did you see her too?" Wei nodded, unable to speak. For a long time, neither moved. The fire died down, the smoke thinned. The chaos had burned itself out, leaving behind only silence and ash. By dawn, the authorities sealed the site, declaring it sacred ground. Scientists would continue their tests. Leaders would continue their debates. But for Wei, none of that mattered anymore. He no longer sought proof. He no longer feared doubt. He carried something greater inside him now. Weeks later, he returned alone. The barricades were still there, though the crowds had thinned. He placed a single flower at the edge of the trench and stood quietly, the morning sun warm on his face. The whispers were gone. But the silence was not empty. It was peace. He closed his eyes, breathed deeply, and for the first time in years, he prayed, not out of fear, not out of desperation, but out of gratitude. As he turned to leave, he felt it, just a flicker, a brush of warmth against his heart. A reminder. His sister's voice, soft and steady. "Walk forward, Wei. The fire is behind you now." And with that, he stepped into the rising sun, no longer haunted, but reborn.